Hi and welcome. We're going to start with an acknowledgement to country, and Emily McDaniel, one of our speakers, is going to kick us off with that.
Thank you. My name's Emily McDaniel. I'm a Wiradjuri woman from the Kalari clan, the Lachlan River clan, in central New South Wales. And I've lived on Darug country my whole life and have been fortunate to work on Gadigal country. And before we begin, we really need to start, as we always should, on this country, which is by acknowledging the history that we're standing and being part of in this place. Country isn't just what's beneath our feet, it's the skyscapes, the waterscapes. And even though we're up here, 60 levels above, we're still on country. We're on the country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And all of these stories are embedded throughout this city, if you're looking closely and you're feeling closely enough. We're not far from where the tank stream ran straight through, almost down Pitt Street. You can see as you're walking down Martin Place that the country slowly starts to slope toward that tank stream. So people have always gathered here. And I think it's when we're remembering the connections to place and how we use place that we're really able to connect with where we are. So thank you.
So hi everyone, welcome. I'm Adrian Burnett. I'm the chair of SAMAG, and on behalf of the committee, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you here to Holding Redlick for our final event for the year. I have a very short few thank yous at the top of this. Then I will introduce our speakers. We will finish with some Q&As, which Emily is going to frame for us before we go to that. And then you're welcome to join us for some drinks and refreshments, which have been provided by our generous sponsors for this evening. Just for those of you who don't know, just a little bit of a spruik about SAMAG, Sydney Arts Management Advisory Group. We run an annual program of seminars and workshops which are practical, inspiring and innovative, and they're designed for professionals and professional artists, arts workers, and it's about sharing and encouraging knowledge and sector development and upskilling. We believe in the power of the arts and the individual and collective impact it has on all of us. And we look to challenge big issues, spark conversation and give ideas a platform. I'd particularly like to thank Holding Redlick for hosting us this evening. I'd like to also particularly thank our coordinator who actually runs SAMAG. It's actually not me, it's Sasha, who you met on the way in. A shout out to our committee, who we've got some of them in the audience tonight. It's a volunteer committee, and we're a membership-based organisation. So if you enjoy this evening, if you're not a member, please tell your friends, encourage your colleagues, and you can see Sasha. It's a great Christmas present. You might want to join up. It's very, it's a great networking opportunity, and we have some really great talks throughout the year. So tonight, we are talking about facilitating First Nations recognition in public spaces through cultural practices, creating space and listening. What does it mean to create places that connect to country, and how can our cities foster greater awareness and stories of place? Annie Tennant is a national urban strategist for the property business Lendlease, and he leads public art, culture and place outcomes for projects embedding First Nations design and sustainability principles. Until recently, she was the General Manager of Sustainability and Culture at Barangaroo South, and he is on the board of Reconciliation New South Wales, and she's a member of the Advisory Council for the UNSW Faculty of the Built Environment. Emily McDaniel is an independent curator, writer and educator from the Kalari clan of the Wiradjuri Nation in central New South Wales, as you've just heard. Her practice centres on truth-telling, storytelling and resurfacing histories through the work of contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. She consults on curatorship, engagement and interpretation in the public domain and the museums and galleries sector. Please join me in welcoming Annie and
Thanks so much for having us. It's a real pleasure and a treat to be here and to see beautiful, warm faces. Oh, yeah, Lana. It's gorgeous to see so many warm, beautiful faces in the room, so thank you very much for having us here.
I was thinking tonight we could really just have the conversations we always have, but in front of an audience, maybe a little bit
shorter,
a little bit more moderated. But I thought a really important part to start, and I've never actually asked you this question outright, is what was it that the many years that you decided to first take a course in architecture and in urban design, what was it that actually made you want to pursue that?
You don't know this story. Is that even on? When I was 8, I'd say I was quite good at maths, and I was good at the time I was good at art. I wouldn't say I was good at art now that I'm surrounded by professionals. My mum encouraged me in the direction of architecture, so I thought I'll be an architect. And then when I was doing my Year 10 work experience, I thought I'd rebel and do work experience at the Art Gallery of New South Wales.
Did you?
Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? And then I really realised that I did want to go into architecture and city making. I didn't think of it as city making at the time. What I thought of it as was architecture seems really cool and it seems interesting. So I got a scholarship to the Government Architects Office and worked there for a decade, but became passionate about public space, cities for people, creating places for people, and all that entails. And I think, as you know, I worked with Dylan Combermary and Alison Page when I, at the age of 21, and that's when I first encountered First Nations design and how important that is in the creation of our cities and places.
Yeah. Is that working?
I don't. It is.
It is?
It
Oh,
doesn't
subtle.
seem like it up here.
Okay.
It feels so soft.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks. That'll be good for the film. I think
You can cut that. Yeah,
Edit it.
you can
Yeah.
edit that one out. Yeah.
And then I did my Masters of Urban Design and Landscape and yada yada, so that's a longer story, but that's really the kernel.
People.
Yeah, people. What about you? Curating, public art in particular.
I never really chose to go into curating, I don't think. It just sort of happened as it was. I was pretty sure that I didn't really like art.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought I didn't really like art.
You still sometimes don't.
Depends what it is. I thought, I don't really get it. And when I was about 17 or 18, my cousin worked at the Art Gallery of New South Wales and said, look, I'd like you to come in and start working with some young groups who need more support in their gallery education. And so I came in to the Art Gallery, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander art, and I knew those stories and I knew what that was about. And then suddenly I realised they call it art. For us, it's culture and it's embedded in us. And these were the conversations that I'd been part of since I was born, that I grew up with. And from then on, I was really kind of supported by my cousin Jonathan Jones and Hetty Perkins. Both of them really mentored me into this space. And I think that says something about First Nations leadership. You don't really know where you're going, but there's someone behind you saying, keep going, that's right, you're going in the right direction. And I think that that's really, really important. I work as much as an educator and as a writer. I often feel discomfort with the term curator. There's a power dynamic that comes with it. And the relationships that I form with artists, many of whom are, 2 generations older than me, my elders, it doesn't quite sit with me. And so more and more I've been finding that I'm using this term of I'm a storyteller. And I tell that story the way it needs to be told. That might be through an exhibition, that might be through a collaboration with an artist, a public artwork, a public art plan like the Harbour Walk. It comes back to telling stories. And I think in a way that decolonises the methodologies around curatorship, you know. And again, it comes back to people,
Yeah.
their stories. When I was younger, and you know, identity can be a really difficult thing when you don't live on country. And I really gained my cultural and artistic education at the Art Gallery of New South Wales with Jonathan and with Hetty. And the relationships I formed with artists, they mentored me, they really impacted my own identity as a Wiradjuri woman. I kind of created my own sort of clan in Sydney that allowed me to do the work that I do. So I think that's interesting that we both started at the same point, that it starts with people, you know. And for me, my most recent work is about helping people to acknowledge country. I think that's my current work.
You don't think a lot of your works are that?
Yeah, it's all that.
It's all right. Yeah.
It's all that, but I guess when I started working in the public domain, and I've got to say, I didn't even think it was a thing until I started working with you.
Oh.
Which, well, I didn't. I thought curatorship, museums, galleries, exhibitions, publications, stock standard kind of stuff. It wasn't until we first started working together.
Should we tell that story?
Yes, yes.
Do you want?
Yes.
So apparently we met at this really sexy coffee shop called Vessel. Do any of you know it? It's right next to Barangaroo.
Before Barangaroo kind of turned
blossomed.
into something.
Is that the right word for Barangaroo? Probably not. Emerged. So I spoke with Hetty and I said, Hetty, will you curate a work for us? So we hadn't even determined what the first artwork would be, and so we knew that we wanted an Indigenous curator. We knew we wanted the first artwork to be by an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander artist. So of course we went straight to Het, and Hetty said, "Oh mate, I'm too busy, but I've got someone for you." I said, "Yeah, okay." And look, I'll be honest, I had commissioned an artwork before. I had, but not on this scale, right? Not with this kind of budget. And I just, you know what, I did as Hetty told me. And I think that most of us in the room would. Yeah, wouldn't you?
Always.
Always. And so I said, right, I'll meet this Emily. And did I ring? I think I rang you.
A number of times. I was too scared to answer.
Yeah. And that's our, we've got a secret code. Yeah, I just keep ringing and she eventually answers. It's true.
Yes.
Or I'll text her and say, I'm going to give you another 2 days and then I'm going to ring. Okay, just tomorrow I really need you to ring me back. But, you know, we have a little code. And so we met at Vessel.
Yeah.
And I instantly felt grounded with you and I felt a connection. And I'm not sure, it just felt like we knew each other instantly. What was your reaction?
I mean, again, that was another notion of I'm just kind of walking forward and Hetty's saying, keep going, you're going in the right direction. And I finally answered the call. I was quite nervous because I just thought, does she know I've never done any public art?
It didn't faze me.
And look, I would have been, 23?
Oh, you're only 23 now.
I was 23. When she suddenly decided that, yes, the first public artwork of Barangaroo will be curated by a 23-year-old curator with no experience in public art. Why? What was it that
Well, I didn't
That's
know
a
you were
risk.
23.
Didn't you?
No idea. I didn't stop and think about it. I just thought, I feel that we can work together. This is an important artwork. For me, it was about trust, and I felt that we could develop that trust. Look, I mean, a question from me to you again is, not everyone trusts a corporate, and not everyone would trust someone saying, hey, come and work on this project with me. So I think it was a leap of faith on your side as well, not just from my side. I just, honestly, it was just about, it was a feeling I had, it was my intuition.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then Jonathan.
If I'm speaking really honestly,
Yeah.
I do work for Annie Tennant, not really Lend Lease in my mind.
No, that's true. You've said
It
that,
comes
yeah.
back to the people that I work with and that I can trust. And early on, I noticed that Annie could really roll with anything that I threw at her. And nothing would be taken personally because she was all in on this project. If it was, Annie, we got to slow down a little bit, have some more conversations. I don't know what this will be yet, but we can start putting out the feelers, then she'd immediately respond to it. And I find that that is the biggest challenge as a First Nations person working in the arts or potentially any space. I do things slower. I'm not doing nothing when I'm going slowly. I'm just doing it carefully and mindfully with that understanding of responsibility, you know. In the Wiradjuri language, we've got a word called Yinjamara. And it means many things, but simultaneously it means to respect, to honour, to go slowly, to listen. And that's kind of the way that I work, which can be the opposite of major corporations, you know. And that's the real challenge. And that's where Annie comes in to bat for me and creates that space and that time for things to be done with Yinjamara, with respect.
I think it's fair to say I had to learn that concept. Yeah, I did. I like to talk, but I really, and this is, I think, the topic of tonight is how do you create that space and how do you create that trust to listen, not just to listen, but to understand what's needed by the artist, by the curator. And I don't think I always did it well, but you know, you try. But I think half of our battle in the room, I would say, is being the advocate and protecting the process, protecting the people from the outside forces. I would say, you say that you go more slowly. I actually think because of the care that you take and the consideration that you bring, everyone else around, and I think some will understand this, it's kind of like, oh quick, we've got to hurry, we've got to act, we've got to build, we've got to do it, what have you. When you're in that kind of mode, you may make mistakes, you may inadvertently create a problem or a situation that then needs to be undone or needs to be modified or needs to be moderated. When you work with Yinjamara, those issues don't arise because you've taken the care and the consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with that way of working, it's not just about creating space, it's about holding space. Often what I see with so many organisations is we've got this small opportunity and this is what it is, and we can probably squeeze in a First Nations project and that'd be great because we're acknowledging First Nations people. And it doesn't work like that. You have to clear the space. You have to let go of something that you're doing to create the space for us. And I think that that's really, really key. So many people don't understand that you have to let go of something for us to step fully into that space.
Right.
You know? Yeah, and that's often a conflict with corporations, you know.
I'm going to explain a concept that Alison Page taught me. Did I tell you this one on the phone? Juicy dangling.
Oh,
It's good, isn't it?
oh.
So what it means is,
I don't know.
And, oh no, it's quite funny. So it's this concept that, and this is what I have to protect First Nations designers and artists from quite a lot. It's like, let's bring them in the room, and we'll say, here's an idea, and they can pitch to us. So we, those with the power and the money and the position, say, juicy dangle an opportunity. Whereas, frankly, we need you more than you need us, right? And we should be learning and listening rather than juicy dangling opportunities that aren't real.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just looking out. What I'm seeing sitting here is that smoke-covered
Yeah.
skyscape behind me. And yes, you do need to start listening to First Nations people and the knowledge and the information that we have. You know, Lend-Lease is a massive organisation, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around it.
Don't
Really,
bother. You don't need
my
to.
anchor is Annie.
You don't need to.
I've been asked at different times to come on board with other Lend-Lease projects
Oh,
that
have you?
maybe Annie wasn't part of.
Oh.
Like, remember that advisory group?
That was mine.
No, it wasn't. It
Oh,
definitely
different
wasn't.
My design advisory group?
One before that.
Oh, I can't remember.
Anyway.
Blocked it.
Yeah, blotted it out, perhaps. And it's important, that was the moment where I thought, the values and what I've created with Annie haven't translated across Lend-Lease.
Yet.
This is, well, as yet, it's not assumed knowledge
No.
that we work with. And I was really aware that it was a relationship that we'd created. And I went into this room and I met this other person who was working at Lend-Lease, and she said, so what we're thinking is
That one.
we'll
Yep,
kind of
got it now. Yep.
we'll kind of pull together all of our ideas, and you can, you know, add some suggestions if you like. And I thought, I'm not interested in that anymore. You know, very shallow engagements with Aboriginal knowledge holders, curators, peoples. It's no longer good enough. What we need is big commitments by organisations, you know? And what I'm quite committed now is how do we impact the rest of Lend-Lease and the way they approach public art and First Nations recognition in the public space.
Can we strike out the name Lend-Lease and just say all developers and builders
Yeah,
in the city?
yes.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about it. Yeah.
Yes.
What do we need to do? Well, look, I hate to look, we're going to do Yinjamarra, right? We're going to take our time and we're going to do really good projects. But I actually think, and this is a term you and I talked about just earlier, which is at the moment there's this zeitgeist, right? Caring for country and caring for community is so important to us right now while we are tackling major climate issues. If we do not listen to our First Nations brothers and sisters, if we do not walk alongside each other, we will be surrounded by bushfire smoke every single summer for the next 5 or 6 years. I don't have an answer on how we transform everything, except that I think we just have to do what we can do with the projects that we have and show leadership.
I think a lot about that notion of an acknowledgement of country, and I obviously did one there, but you know, it's not actually a sentence to be repeated.
No.
It's an action. How did you get here today? Did you take public transport? Did you drive your massive SUV into the city and park it? Do you do that every day? What are your actions that you contribute every day to this country? And I think we need to start thinking about that collectively. You know, one of my most recent projects that recently was announced in conjunction with City of Sydney and Property New South Wales, is the notion of a harbour walk that connects the Maritime Museum over in Parama through to Woolloomooloo. And what that actually is about is getting people to acknowledge country with their actions. You have to walk this country to get to know it.
Yeah.
When you're acknowledging country, you're introducing yourself to that country.
Yeah.
And you need to allow it to introduce itself back to you so that it recognises you. We need to reconnect with the landscapes that we're a part of. How many people walk up and down Martin Place with no understanding of the significant sites that they're walking across? You know? How many people have actually dipped their feet into the harbour and connected with the fact that we're on one of the world's most incredible ecosystems and harbours? You know, we've lost our physical connection with the country that we're part of. And often I find that with cities, it's this notion that, well, if you cover it up with concrete, then somehow that magnetic charge of country is interrupted, you know. It gets challenged, it becomes neutral, when really it radiates through that space with meaning. And I think not all people know how to connect with those histories, which is why we need to start engaging with public art in the domain to allow those stories, that methodology of how do you listen and acknowledge country to be more apparent.
And perhaps just elaborating on that, you can talk about the Lucy Simpson project that we did together, which were the beautiful rugs on the level 14 and then on level 19 of our office space.
They were beautiful. I've worked...
Image here.
Google it. You've all got phones. I've worked quite a lot with Uwallara artist Lucy Simpson, and I really wanted to work with her at Lend-Lease, and the opportunity arose where there was going to be a major commission of these massive textiles, these feature rugs about the size of this room, to be in their major...
client floor.
Client
floor, yeah.
It's not a word in my vocabulary.
Okay, sorry.
Client floor. There you
Main
go.
entrance.
And we started talking about how do people come into this space and they think that they're above Sydney, they're not part of Sydney, they're not within Sydney. How do we change that relationship? And I worked with her and we discussed, you know, looking at water and this notion that water becomes this interconnecting conduit, really. This notion that maybe water remembers everyone who it's ever come in contact with, you know. This water remembers Barangaroo the woman who rode through it in her Ngawi. It remembers when Arthur Phillip came in with the new people. It remembers everything that's ever happened here, and we sought to reconnect people from level 14 back with the ground. And it was just an example of how you can use any opportunity to redirect the way people think about place and country, you know.
And the lovely thing about that project was that we started with 2 rugs on one level, and they were so loved that then the board said, we want our own. And they, you know, we then did another 2 rugs, which was fantastic. Looking back towards the Blue Mountains, and these rugs really speak to the topography and the landscape that you see. You wouldn't see them at the moment, but that you would see from level 19 looking back.
That was a really funny project now that I think of it, because the client felt so uneasy with an undetermined outcome. You know, Lucy was literally designing it as she went, with sketches and colour samples and weavings, and it was really unsettling for them to settle with the notion that we're not sure, this is the process. And it was my role. Well, it's another example of how I was connected into Lend-Lease and then maybe not working directly with Annie. But what my role was as a curator was to say, hey, you're actually being invited into such an incredible process. Most people don't get to see this. They don't get to see the sketches. They don't hear the conversations and the interviews and the oral histories.
Right.
And they don't get to see the watercolours that she thinks of at 2 a.m. You know, this is part of coming along with us. So that was a really interesting project. I'm used to Annie just trusting 100% in what I say, in the direction that I feel we need to go in. And it was interesting to have to mitigate that when that trust wasn't there.
And then you ring me, Annie, help. Can you just, you know, and she sends me in like a bulldog.
Yeah. And then you just inject Annie into the room and it sorts it out,
Yeah.
you know. But, you know, I've spoken a lot about how I think about country. And it underpins everything that I do and why I do everything I do. I'm interested in your understandings of country, how they've come to what they are, how they've been influenced through your relationships.
Such a hard question for me because it gets, it becomes kind of emotional actually because
I think that's important though.
Yeah.
You know?
I know that's where you were going. To me, well, probably to many of us in the room, we need to acknowledge our full 65,000 years of history. We need to acknowledge all our stories of place. We need to acknowledge what we have done to our country, what we've done to our ecology, what we've done to each other. And every time I spend any minute of time with you or with Jonathan or with Hetty or Alison or any of the wonderful men and women that I've worked with on these projects, I actually feel awed and I feel deeply privileged to be in the position I'm in to learn from you and to understand what my role can be in illuminating or in educating or in supporting, in nurturing, in like I actually see my role as being that nurturer or being that supporter to make to allow you to do more projects or to allow other First Nations designers or artists to do more projects. And if that means setting up mentorships, if that means setting up, you know, convincing someone to find another $1,500 to do something or other, then that's what I'll do. I think you and I have talked about this a little bit before that I've got 2 kids and I think about the kind of country that they're growing up in and I want them to know who they are and I want them to know what it is to be fully Australian and to know you and to know, you know, Auntie Mudge and to know, you know, community and to take them out to the desert, to take them to Broome, to take them to Kayaf and throw them at the aunties under the fig tree and they, you know, they learned how to sew, you know, ghost nets. Remember when, were you there when, and my then 3-year-old learnt how to sew fish scales with the aunties under the fig tree at Kayaf? I mean, I've got to tell you, that's still a defining moment of my life and that's, to me, one of the most important things that we can be doing is living in partnership. And I think we should talk about sisterhood.
Yeah, that's really, really important, you know. I remember when the first project we did was a beautiful collaborative between Annie Esme Timbri, Bidjigal senior artist, in collaboration with Jonathan Jones, a Wiradjuri Gamilaroi artist based in Sydney, and it still stands pride of place at Barangaroo. And I think that was really significant to have the first artwork at Barangaroo by a First Nations artists and curator. And I remember, you know how I was avoiding your calls when you first wanted to get in touch?
Which time?
All of them. when many years ago when we started working and you had to call a few times, I was really thinking, is this too big? Is it too much? And I'm not sure I'm up to the challenge. And then I sat with that for a while, again, allowed that Yinjimarra, that respect for that moment and the time. And I thought, what other time in Australia's history have we asked an Aboriginal person, how should we go about building this place?
I wish we'd asked you before the master planning, but anyway, that's, you know.
But I thought, we've never had our say in how the stories of this place are told. We've never been able to take that first step forward and show you which way to go. And it was at that moment that I realised that that responsibility was much larger than me. And it wasn't actually about me at all. It was about creating the space for my community to be able to share their stories. And for me, Barangaroo presents an undeniable challenge.
Oh.
The site, how do we reconcile a place that is named after a Gamaragal woman who fiercely opposed the expansion of the colony and the building of Sydney and Australia?
Yeah.
How do we honour, connect, grapple and understand what that means, naming this place after Barangaroo? And, you know, I think I'm noticing a trend in naming places after Aboriginal people. That's not us.
No.
That's not what we did. That's not what
do.
we do. We name places from the resources from the country. It's not about the people. They're part of the landscape. It's actually a Western linguistic naming device, another form of linguistic colonisation that's been imposed upon us, but it is on us. So what do we do? I think it's my responsibility to ensure that Barangaroo remains a woman, first and foremost, that her actions are remembered, that her name isn't reduced to an address or a postcode. And as a curator or storyteller, for me it's about looking to the resilience and the resistance and the continuity of Aboriginal people in Sydney. It's looking to the matrilineal families like the Timbrys, who have always worked in this place and space with the materials of country. It's about repositioning Sydney language, Aboriginal language, back into the landscape, you know. Barangaroo is a funny thing. I feel like there's an amnesia of that site almost before like 2000, you know.
Yeah, what I have found, and don't give away my secret, is that you and I have like kamikazed our way. Maybe kamikaze is the wrong word, but we've
Something less violent.
infiltrated aspects of the project that maybe not everyone notices, like Daramu House. I worked with Dr. Jacqueline Troy, who wrote the Sydney language, the book that's recently been published that you'd find at the library at the moment. And it's named Treehouse. And someone said to me, well, how did you do that? And I said, well, you just tell the investors that it's really important we do it, and they do it. There are lots of, then it doesn't sound big, but when you get investors to say, yes, let's name a 7-storey commercial building a Sydney language word, it's, I think it's something, you know, and I think we've just got to keep going. One of the comments you made earlier about public art, the Auntie Esme and Jonathan project, I do wish that we had got hold of the master plan earlier. I do wish that we had First Nations voices there earlier, but now that's our opportunity. Now that's where we go to from here. We look at opportunities from the beginning. Is this an appropriate place to develop? Is this an appropriate design team? Is there a First Nations person at the table who isn't just there for the bid, but they're there for the entire project? They're paid appropriately. Their contract is good. We've got we didn't talk about Terry Janke.
Aboriginal people.
Terry Janke's in the room, right? That they employ Aboriginal people, that we have skilling and employment outcomes. that there's this three-dimensional holistic approach to how we build and develop cities at all round. It's not just one element, it's all elements.
And I guess another example of that is a recent project that I'm working on and probably will end up working with
For the rest of your life?
for the rest of my life, the Harbour Walk with City of Sydney. I went to Annie and I said, there are important stories that we need to tell at Barangaroo and we haven't told them yet. And we really need to do that. We need your help. We need you to come on board. I think that people need to know that Aboriginal people worked at the site that is now known as Barangaroo since the 1820s, when wharves and docks were built on that harbour. They were essentially continuing cultural knowledge, understandings of the water and the tide and the animals, and fishing practices and sustainability. And that continued right through to the 1960s. Aboriginal rights also took off there with the connections to the Maritime Union. It was there that Chicka Dixon started to realise that he had this voice and he had this ability to rally and create social change at those unions, and then took that to Redfern, to Canberra, and it changed Aboriginal rights in Sydney. These are the stories that are at Barangaroo. And we need public art to tell them. We need to engage with artists and storytellers. And it was another opportunity and another example of,
we're doing it.
Annie, we've got to do this thing.
I just do as I'm
We've
told.
got to do it.
Yeah, I do as I'm told.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, we could continue this on for another hour easily. But what we might do is open up the space to some questions. But before doing that, if you have a question that's kind of been lingering at the back of your mind, I want you to do a few things before you share it. I want you to make sure that it is a question that we can reply to and respond to. And I want you to consider that whether this is the forum to ask it, or is it a quieter conversation somewhere else. But if it's something we can all benefit from, then I'd like to open it up and ask if anyone would like to share.
You talked a bit earlier about the idea of, I wrote it down, it was in order to create and hold space, you have to let go of something. Can you talk a bit more about what you mean?
So the question was asked, about that notion of, you can't just create space, you have to let something go,
Right.
you have to let go of something. I think that's a really important notion, and one that, Western societies find very difficult. It's this notion of what are you giving back to allow something new to be in that space. And that's kind of what I'm coming back to. I mean, I'm a Wiradjuri woman. We're no Juri people. So people not having, that was the notion that you don't own anything, so therefore everything is able to be shared. And that's what I take into this. And I hear a lot about this word decolonising. Everyone's onto it. It's the new buzzword, decolonising. But, I was recently at the National Gallery of Australia and I was mentoring the new Indigenous leadership program sponsored by Wesfarmers. And they were talking about decolonising the gallery. And I thought, but what if that means not having a gallery?
Yeah. Well, yeah, right.
What if that means not having a gallery? What if it means giving that land back to the traditional owners and then just creating a blank space and saying, what can we do together? And unless you're really open to that, then you're not open to decolonising.
I was curious about how you work with people who, I guess in that context, struggle with ambiguity and what's the outcome?
Oh my
going to
God,
be?
yes.
And how did you kind of handle that
Great
conversation?
question. I work with many people who are very linear, and I have conversations all the time about the importance of ambiguity, the importance of nuance, the importance of not really knowing where we're going, but that the process or the way we work together is just as important. And in my new role, I'm having that conversation probably 3 times a day, sometimes with my direct colleagues. And what I find is that I've been there a long time. I have developed strong relationships. People either get me or they don't, and those that don't get me now avoid me. Or they just go, and those that kind of think, oh, she can solve my problem. I get the issues or the projects, and he will help fix this. Because I can go into I'm pointing to you, you're not a problem, go into a situation and try to help solve it. I get quite a few architects ringing me saying, oh, this project manager. And I try to mediate.
What I've really appreciated though from you working inside is your constant push and insistence that if you're doing public art, you need a curator.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that, did we?
Why are you so strong on that? Because what I'm noticing is a trend that's happening. The developer has a lot of money.
Or the builder.
And it starts with being uncomfortable with uncertainty. They've seen an artwork that they really like once they've Googled, and they want that artist, and that's the work that they're going to have.
So you know, I had someone from within my company say, oh, you just did that beautiful Shadows artwork with Sabina Hornig. Could we do that on this other project? And I said, what do you mean do that? Do you mean a work in glass? No, that work. And I was like, oh no, not what? What? Yeah, curators bring an ability to translate and support and nurture. I've used the word nurture a bit, haven't I? I feel like I translate between your pure developer and your builder and you, and you translate between me and the artist.
Yeah. But what you were saying about care is it underpins curatorial practice. To curate is to care, to cure, to care deeply, and to have that really personal relationship with an artist. As a curator working with major corporations or councils, whatever it is, I feel like my version is to give you a vision of possibility, you know?
And editing. You do possibility and you are really good at saying no. That's not going to happen. No. That's also very important.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, and it's not something that I offer to all clients that I work with. It's particularly this relationship that we have, though.
Oh, because you can say, oh, of course. Yeah,
It
right,
is.
yeah.
And I think it's really important in this space for women to be supporting women. You know?
Yeah.
And I once went to an awards night for, what was it?
What did we do?
Women in construction.
I dragged her to a NAWIC event.
Women
We
in
had a good time.
construction. But
I used to be president of that.
it was amazing.
Yeah, there you go.
I hadn't considered how difficult it is for Annie to hold her own space within that industry and to bring on the next generation.
There are lots of women.
women.
There are lots of women.
Yeah,
It's all right.
none like you.
No, stop it. I think the important sisterhood conversation was around challenges that we've faced on our project, each of our projects over the last few years, and how one of the things I did want to acknowledge is the support that you've given me over the last few years, and how you've used your witchy sense to just know when I've needed you. And I think that's really important, that in our industry it's really hard to do what we do, and you need people to have your back.
Absolutely.
They've probably got real questions and we're just gas bagging about, you know, it's like a love affair.
Hi, I'm Sally Marwood from River and Poetry.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
and in relation to Land Lease, and we use, is this working?
Yes, it's actually working, yeah.
We use First Nations poetry
Yes.
created in language to activate spaces and places for cultural placemaking. Embedding poetry boardwalks to light boxes, so they're both ephemeral as well as permanent fixtures. And one of the great, because we're led by elders, language custodians and First Nations poets, we still have issues around authenticity in terms of the delivery, because I'm not First Nations, and even though the person who runs the program is First Nations, it's that long-term ideal that it should be completely and utterly.
Oh, yeah.
The notion of cultural placemaking and activating
Yeah.
spaces
Mm-hmm.
is probably something to do with a white person's construct anyway.
Mm.
So I'm really
Great
curious
question.
about what are successful examples that you can cite in terms of activation of places and spaces that are embody First Nations art or combination of text, language, sculpture.
Barangaroo.
No,
Shell
we can
wall.
shell wall, sure. But we can find other. We'll think of other ones. It's hard though, isn't it?
Is it led entirely by First Nations?
No, I think that isn't the question.
It's more general than
The question's generally, can we think of examples where you feel that stories of place, Indigenous stories of place, have been successfully?
The Eora journey. The Eora journey.
There's harmony with the stories, the history that underpins the site, both from First Nations and a non-First Nations perspective, because it's about mutual respect as well, capturing.
I mean, I think the Eora journey is an incredible example of public art with
Yeah.
direction and commitment by the City of Sydney that's been led. It was endorsed, I think, in 2012, maybe?
Oh, the cultural ribbon. That one?
It emerged from the
Yeah.
cultural ribbon, but that's a really great example of how that created the foundation for further projects to
Yeah.
come, like In Imagine Me by Tony Albert,
Yep.
which was done in partnership with a lot of the Aboriginal servicemen.
Yep.
Examples can also be, Wagon Magoolia of Brenda Croft's work that sits in Farm Cove. There are so many examples of that within the city, but it starts from a strategy that I believe is led by a First Nations person.
Yeah.
Hetty Perkins in that
Yep.
instance, but it's about leading that strategy that informs projects.
But what is, I think, particularly special about the Eora Journey project, or series of projects, is that you are effectively, or you and Hetty and Glenn, have just said, here are some significant sites around the harbour that are really, really significant culturally, not just from First Nations perspective, but one of the sites is the Opera House, yeah? Another site is right in smack bang in the rocks. So you've got these very complex stories, very complex histories that will be reconciled or need to be reconciled or addressed somehow through your process.
Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating to see how it goes. And we've got your back. You'll be right. We have totally not answered your question, really,
Yes,
because I think it's a really hard question. I think it's a really hard question to answer, because I do think that there are many stories of relationships that sit behind projects that none of us will ever know about. And so the empowering of First Nations designers or artists or what have you, we may never know about the support that they got or the role that they had. I find it a very hard question to answer, because it can be really complex.
The process itself.
Yeah, so that's right. So you may have a First Nations artist that got this great commission that we know was paid well, that had a great Terry Janke contract, if I've given her enough plugs.
Yeah.
Yep. She's amazing. But you don't know, but the outcome may not be something that really is necessarily the story of the place. So it may not be something that we all love, but the process was really good. Or the process can be completely terrible. The artist was paid so poorly and we all go, oh my God, that artwork is amazing. It's so complex. But we should all have more poetry.
Last week I was at a state library event and there was an acknowledgement of country, and it was the topic was about an Australian writer who was based in Brisbane, and in the acknowledgement of country, the presenter was went back to the day on that particular day talking about injustices of Palm Island, and that was an interesting. It was an interesting thing to stop and think, because I hadn't seen this approach to acknowledgement, but it didn't tie into the story of the Brisbane author, and not that it would specifically, but I wondered, is there something in the spectrum of acknowledging country that it may take away from the topic of the story, and there should be something in the range of what you're talking about, you know, that might sort of help the person who was the author of that particular book think, oh, hang on, are we going miles away? Is there a way of somehow having a conversation? It may have already happened, whether it's sort of like, wow, it's a very different topic, you know, it's important to talk about these issues, but I thought it wasn't particularly Sydney related or to the person. I thought maybe it was too far. Maybe it's just getting used to hearing very different stories involved in acknowledgement, because I thought it was fascinating. But I thought, wow, where do people go for guidelines? Or is it just go for it and just see it evolve and emerge because it's still so new?
It's not new. It's the notion, and I think it's interesting that many people assume that an acknowledgement of country is a new thing. When you're doing an acknowledgement of country, you are the most recent participant of an ancient practice that we have done for 80,000 years, before time immemorial. Every time we stepped on country that wasn't our own, we asked for permission. We acknowledged who had those cultural custodianship relationships to place. And so often we now consider this the new space for acknowledgements of country, boardrooms.
Yeah.
But you need to be thinking about how you match the acknowledgement with your actions. There is no set words for acknowledgement. We didn't walk up to somebody's boundaries and say, hang on a minute, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, past and present. We didn't do that.
And emerging.
And
Sorry.
emerging. We didn't do that. We spoke acknowledging what that moment was. There is no right or wrong way to do that, as long as you are acknowledging place. And often when you begin that acknowledging country, it opens up your eyes and it opens up the conversation to be talking about stories that are across the country, not just where you are.
And truth-telling
Absolutely.
comes into it, which I think is part of your question, yeah? So acknowledging uncomfortable truths can be a very powerful part of acknowledgement of country.
Annie, Emily, anything else that you wanted to say that you think you didn't cover?
No,
Oh, we can.
Thank you for coming, and
thanks
thank
for
you
coming.
for seeing the value in participating in conversations like this, you know, and I hope that you're having similar ones back at where you're working and the places that you're enriching with your own story. So thank you for coming along. Thanks for coming. Yeah.